Hello, good afternoon. I'm Shuddha. Monica, Jeebesh is sitting in the auditorium. If this was bigger, he would have come here. Thank you very much for having us here. It's been really delightful and very stimulating, and for me as well in the last 2 days in the workshop. And it's such a wonderful continuity in a way. We're going to start with a small fragment, and then we'll carry on from there.
Assume that art is the universe, and art history is a sub-branch of astronomy. For what is art but the population of the universe with new matter for its consideration? Detach yourself momentarily from the mothership of art history and step out for a spacewalk.
George Kublai, about whom we just heard such a wonderful presentation, actually talks a lot about stars in astrophysics, in what is for us a prescient text, and which was also referred to in the previous presentation. And it's not the shape of time, it's the shape of time reconsidered. A response written by Kublai, published in Perspecta 1982, answering critics of the shape of time, and you heard a different quotation from it, which really disturbed, in a sense, the state of debate at that time in art history, but at the same time delighted artists with its outlandish suggestions about prime objects, aesthetic fatigue, and fast and slow happenings. Speaking of prime objects, the shadowy prefiguration in artists' minds of the things they make, Kublai says,
in theory, being originally in the maker's mind, no prime object exists in its pristine state. They all have been altered in actuality, and they suffer the accidents of time, being known only by indirection, like stars vanishing in supernova explosions. This sounds like astrophysics, which is a field thickly populated with radical theories that are beyond proof. Black holes were first named by Archibald Wheeler in 1973. These are small, super-dense stellar corpses which destroy matter by gravitational dissolution, removing information from the universe. Their opposites, however, are white holes, from which new matter erupts, endowed with color, texture, and chemical composition. Their existence as mathematical creatures or objects was first postulated in 1964, and today white holes are regarded as time-reversed black holes, renewing the universe, although none has ever been registered by observation, however indirect. They are prefigured, however, in the Manichaean universe of light springing from darkness. Thus, my idea about prime objects is less mathematical and more historical than white holes, but like them, prime objects may be constructs necessary to the processes from which they may have originated.
Think about what you would have done with the neutrino in the CERN, accelerator. So if an art historian like Kubler can take recourse to a speculative astronomy to talk about art history, then we certainly can take recourse to the convenient cover of art practice to talk about astronomy. Our constructs, our prime objects, may or may not be useful to your discipline, but we array them for your consideration, perhaps in order for you to be entertained by the thought of speculating about processes that might yet originate, as a diversion at the end of a long and busy conference day. Perhaps as metaphors or things with which to think with a little levity about the grave questions of the local and the global, of time, timeliness and contemporaneity, of anteriors and posteriors to this or that historical moment.
But first, before liftoff, as it were, a brief and sobering report from one who has already been there. A cosmonaut reads from his logbook. The surface of each day is a different planet. Cosmonaut, how do you recognize signs of life when you see them on your voyage?
In your logbook, how do you distinguish arid from fecund? A trace of past animation from present vitality, or even from signs of life yet to be?
How do you avoid confusions between prayers, prognoses, and prophecy?
How do you make sure not to mistake the relics of a past voyage for the fossils of giants on a dry riverbed?
Have you considered how the illuminated, polarized day affects your observations? Changing parameters, shifting goalposts? Do time and distance warp your senses?
Yes, Pleistocene, Holocene, Anthropocene, Misanthropocene striations do blur at times. Time turns in on itself. Epochs seep into each other. It's called rocket lag. Take it easy, cosmonaut.
Field note fragment. Following touchdown and a brief period of anticipatory quarantine, the surface of the day was investigated for the presence of organic traces of animate matter. The important question, what constitutes a sign of life, remains in suspended animation. Metabolism, growth, sentience, and reproduction may all be expressing themselves in ambiguous ways. And it is possible that the test criteria being applied in order to identify them are insufficient to this task. How do we know what metabolism or sentience or reproduction look like in hitherto unknown or unimagined life forms? No certain conclusions can be reached at present. Further investigations will continue to be necessary. Further investigations will continue to be necessary.
Farewell, cosmonaut. Have a safe journey.
Farewell, cosmonaut. Have a safe journey. So how do we know signs of life when we see them? How do we know things? How do we know whether things are changing quickly or slowly or not at all? What kind of patience does a historian require to be able to slow things down in his or her mind so that some change is visible? Or what kind of energy does it take to speed up the tempo of observation such that things can be observed to be in flux, while and before they completely change?
At the end of the First World War, two sets of soldiers came back from the same battlefields with two kinds of responses. European soldiers apparently lapsed into silence. And so, as Walter Benjamin declares so poignantly in his essay on the storyteller, stories and storytelling died in the wake of their return. A bunch of letters written by Indian soldiers fighting in Allied armies in Europe tells a different story. They were held back by military censors, and that is how, as jottings in a censor's file, they have become available to the historian as evidence. Here are a few of these fragments. A letter from Mahendralal Verma to Lali Kaliwati, Hindu Girls' School, Lucknow. 17th April 1916, Field Post Office 40, France. With this letter, I am enclosing a picture card showing the death of an English girl. You will notice the man in the picture with the young woman lying senseless on the ground in front of him. She was a nurse in Belgium and used to attend to the wounded. She was charged with the crime of helping English soldiers escape to England via the Netherlands and was sentenced to death. She fainted, and the soldiers refused to fire on her body. Then the officer blew her brains out with a revolver. Letter from Mir Shamshad Ali to Sayyid Karamat Ali Sahib, Delhi, May 1916, Meerut Cavalry Brigade, France. I sent you a photo that was taken in April 1916. Compare it with the photo that was taken in the April of last year. Judge for yourself whether what I write is true or false. Ghulam Rasul Khan to his father, Muhammad Nawaz Khan, Aurangabad. 24th May 1916, Sikandrabad Cavalry Brigade, France. You say the photo is a useless thing, but for me, it is worth all the money I possess. I don't see you in my dreams, and for this reason, it is a comfort to gaze at you in your picture. Yalaith Khan to Muhakamuddin Chakwal, Jhelum District, Punjab. 26th April 1916, Sialkot Cavalry Brigade, France. We are forbidden to write particulars about the war. Moreover, what is one to write? If the fighting were confined to one spot, one could give details. But this war is spread over the whole world. No part of the world can escape from it. Sahib Khan to his brother Abdullah Khan, 112th Cavalry, Shahadra, Swat, Northwest Frontier Province. 15th March 1915, Meerut Division Signaling Company, France. If I come back alive, when I come back to India, I will rehearse to you the whole story from beginning to end like a book of the Arabian Nights.
The silent witness and the would-be narrator of the Arabian Nights are both correspondents of a world at war. Neither silence nor loquaciousness by themselves defined the global moment after the First World War. The terms are reversed at the end of the 40s. The enormity of the violence that follows in the wake of the partition of India produces a generation of silent people. The children of the soldiers who wanted to retell the First World War as the Arabian Nights fell silent in the aftermath of a more proximate slaughter. We say this only to speak of the difficulty of adjudicating what is the correct and legitimate response to a global moment. In one place, one kind of people find speech. In another place and another time, the same people choose silence. We all sense our times, but we do not sense them in the same way. The question of an appropriate artistic response cannot be reduced to an equivalence either to space or time, distance or proximity, nor even to duration or intensity of an experience. Space and time act on our minds, our eyes, our dreams, our memories, our hands, in strange and folded ways. What is global is the distribution of the chances that different places will speak to different people at different times. Nothing comes from just one place. Nothing comes from just one time.
Even in the course of a century, the pressure of stories accumulates across continents and decades and erupts in the unlikeliest of spaces.
When we began work on researching the project that would culminate in a recent work that we did called the Capital of Accumulation, all that was available to us at that time was a supposition, a set of bare facts, and a hunch. There was, in that sense, a propositional cavity, an event-shaped hole that needed filling in. The proposition was that our reading of Rosa Luxembourg's legacy would have something meaningful to say about the contemporary dynamics of capital in cities like Mumbai and Berlin and Warsaw. The bare facts were few, sketchy, and not very well connected. That Rosa Luxembourg spent her life in Warsaw and Berlin, that Berlin and Bombay shared a tenuous history through the transcontinental movement of people who worked in the early film industry, that Berlin, Bombay, and Warsaw were all cities shaped by the cataclysmic forces of the 20th century, and that our library had an eccentric 20-year-old abridged edition of Rosa Luxembourg's Accumulation of Capital, published by a workers' political group in Faridabad at the outskirts of Delhi. The hunch was that somewhere in Warsaw, there was an abandoned industrial facility named after Rosa Luxembourg. This is all that there was to begin with. Inside, I am on the side of outside. If you twist and fold a ribbon of space, what was inside a moment ago could end up as the outside. When a surface cracks, the crack is the surface. The outside is as much within something as without. You have other plans. You have a getaway car. You're in a roll, aren't you? Your rearview mirror is so badly askew that you see far ahead whenever you look behind you. There's no escaping the future when you pursue the past. Now try saying that in your head, the other way around. Horizon. Horizon. 2,000 fragments of possibility, foraging quietly for the future. Across the mudflats there will be a special economic zone, a new megacity that takes 6 months, not 60 nor 600 to build. A 6-lane highway will span the distance to a 6-month city. The drawings are done. Maybe 2,000 flamingos have other ideas. They just turn up to embarrass you with their obstinate attachment to this forsaken world. They refuse to move. They mess things up. They say, "Deal with me. I was, I am, I will be." And then what do you do? What can you do? The earth moves sluggishly, and life takes its time to grow, to move, to fly, to mate, to nest, to feed, even to die. Capital needs a swifter wobble about the planetary axis, shorter seasons, brief lunch breaks, a snappier interval between one working day and another. Something more pliable than that slow, variable capital, that wet mass called humans. The city has gone so far, grown so fast, that the edge has come to the center. The flamingos are now inside the city. The map is out of date. How discontinuous, how surprising, how interrupted, How asynchronous, how mysterious, how quixotic things have been. And there's no accounting for contingencies either. For the perversity of protagonists distributed all across the mud flats of time, nourishing themselves on signs of life drowned in the water. Flamingos getting russet by the hour as they feed. Someday, they'll be as red as Rosa.
Throwing fragments together repeatedly, as if they were moves in a long-winded dice game, and watching to see what patterns would emerge and form when the dice fell was the first step in our research. Out of this game emerged the figure of Lakshmi Sorabgur, a might-have-been latter-day interlocutor to Rosa Luxembourg, the author of a book that rearranged the terms of reference to the capital of accumulation to bring them in line with the realities of the first decade of the 21st century. The second step lay in determining that there was, in fact, a gigantic abandoned factory in Warsaw's industrial district called the Rosa Luxembourg Electric Light Bulb Factory. Once this was known, it became imperative, in a sense, to undertake a reading of the Faridabad edition of The Accumulation of Capital in the ruins of the Rosa Luxembourg Electric Light Bulb Factory in Warsaw. The third step occurred through a set of uncanny coincidences. Through the discovery of the very specific event-shaped whole of this work. Even as preliminary investigations in the early summer of 2009 got underway, researching the life and death of Rosa Luxembourg, marveling at her interests in botany and birds, word came of a forensic analyst, Dr. Martin Sokos, at the Charité Hospital in Berlin, who was claiming that it was likely that a hitherto anonymous, decapitated, and preserved cadaver kept as a teaching specimen in a vitrine in the Charité morgue may well be the actual remains of Luxembourg herself. Here, staring at us in the face, was a speculation that somehow seemed to embody a strange corporeal analogy to the question of the missing body left in the wake of the accumulation of capital. Our interest in one missing body had led us to another, and it was possible that the second missing body was the remains of the author of the first.
Sokos based his speculations on the rumor that Luxembourg had never left the building, which had been passed down generations of doctors and students in the Charité. He claimed that the body that had in fact been buried, and which in turn had since disappeared after the desecration of her grave by the Nazis, was in fact not Luxembourg's, but of another anonymous drowned woman. He suspected that the body in his custody at the Charité had a much greater resemblance to what is known about Rosa Luxembourg's physique and posture from photographs and anecdotal sources. He was joined in this quest by a historian passionately devoted to Luxembourg's political legacy, Dr. Jürgen Schuttrumpf, who, when he met us in Berlin, would neither deny nor confirm Sokos' speculations, but he did show us slides of her herbarium, her meticulous collection of plants undertaken during prison sentences, from which they were considering as a possible repository of residual DNA. This herbarium, which had traveled across continents before finally coming to rest in the Polish State Archives, where it is now, was tracked down, and they unfortunately did not yield any materials for DNA matches, but looking at them and handling them opened for us a window to a different Rosa Luxembourg. Here was a woman who was passionate about plants, birds, animals, and nature, and who could write as movingly of an animal's pain or wonder at the migration of birds as who could write the accumulation of capital. While standing in the spot where a plaque marks her assassination by the Landwehr Canal in Berlin, we realized how close we were to the zoo. It seemed suggested that the only notional witnesses to her last moments on the night of January the 15th in 1919 would have been the animals in the nearby zoo. So we had to find a place for them, a voice for them. a voice which could allude to her anger at the way in which capital denudes and destroys nature. And she also wrote a letter from Wrocław prison, agonizing at the way in which an injured Romanian ox was being pushed beyond its capacity by its cruel master. Those words became the basis of the chorus spoken by the animals in the piece of work from which you just saw a fragment.
And thus suddenly there occurred the appearance of much more than a hitherto missing body. It was anecdotally known to us that Rosa Luxembourg, like many early 20th century intellectuals, regardless of her personally skeptical philosophical orientation, would occasionally amuse and entertain herself and her companions with planchettes and self-consciously ironic forays into the demi-monde of mediums and contact with the deceased. In a strange twist of circumstances, it was beginning to appear as if by embarking on this project, this collective had itself turned into a trinity of mediums who would occasionally receive uncanny bursts of insight and communication from Luxembourg, relate through the entirely imagined medium of Lakshmi Sorabgur, who was found embodied in the form of a sari-clad statue of an Indian woman in the precincts of the Salon of Congresses in the Palace of Science and Culture in Warsaw. Rosa Luxembourg turned up to tease us in Berlin. Lakshmi Sorabgur stood in front of us, of all places, in Warsaw. Somewhere around this time, there was a chance meeting at a dinner party with an artist in Warsaw, Agnieszka Kurant, who happened to be a great-grandniece of Luxembourg herself. She suggested a meeting with her granduncle, a Dr. Kazimir Luxembourg, Rosa Luxembourg's nephew, who was 97 years old, still alive and lucid in Vilnius. In fact, we met Lolita the evening before we went to meet Kazimir Luxembourg. She seemed to think, Agnieszka Kurant seemed to think that the forensic analyst in Berlin had been interested in his DNA. A few weeks later, sitting in his apartment, he told us that he still saw her in his dreams in Warsaw very often. It is not as if there was anything occult about the process of research and creation that this work involved, but repeated encounters with the details that began to accumulate in the form of photographs and letters in archives, prisons, forensic laboratories, hauntingly abandoned factory floors, and the streets of 3 cities led to the formation of several patterns. Sequences, if you like, from George Kubler. The point was to let these patterns or sequences speak in the work without being overwhelmed by the detail. To let the scaffolding of the facts and their minutiae be dismantled even after they had been so carefully constructed, so that the work could finally stand on its own foundations, even if not as a complete and comprehensive explanation, but as a series of cryptic but meaningful moves.
To return to deep space and time. So the art history of deep space and time, which takes off from where the global term began, is an intergalactic art historical colloquium slated to take place every second light year on a hitherto unfamiliar outpost of interstellar but intergalactic space. It is the gathering of a matrix of deeply interwoven histories. This is somewhat confusing because a light year is not a measure of time but of space. This confusion between the categories of time and space is in keeping with the tone and style of art history, and history in general, because while Paris can be casually referred to as the capital of the 19th century, the vanity of a spatial mark on a temporal field, we can still talk about the fluctuating disciplinary distance and proximity between South Asian or African art, South Asian or African art history from art history. Some histories need to be prefaced by their geographies, while others can claim the 7 seas. Successive stellar art historians and some meteoric curators have tried on several occasions to devise a means of circumventing this paradox, but have failed. This means that at any given point in time, there are X number of local art histories occurring simultaneously at intervals of approximately 2 light years across the breadth of the entire inner core of the galaxy of art history. Here, X is computed simply by dividing the radius of the inner galaxy in light years by 2. The fact of an expanding universe means that this number is never constant. No one is quite sure as to how many iterations of the locality are currently pursuing their eccentric orbits through deep space. In practice, the simple cosmic fact of being light years apart is generally misrepresented as the illusion of being light years ahead. Everywhere, everywhen, space is mistaken for time. This is as true now as it was on the day which had no yesterday. As of now, this paradox has had an interesting, if elliptical, impact on the work of contemporary intergalactic artists, art historians, and curators. It remains, however, to be seen as to whether or not the confusion between space and time, between here and now, that is the hallmark of the eccentric orbit of every contemporary art historian and art historical exercise, will eventually be challenged by a more realistic and conceptually sophisticated assessment of the map of intergalactic folds in space and time.
So until this matter is satisfactorily resolved, the fundamental problem of the periodization and chronology of contemporary intergalactic art movements, compounded by the perspective distortions of asynchronous simultaneity, will remain as an irritant and as a provocation to the cosmic artist and art historian, and will continue to be positioned endlessly as the thematic core of exhibitions and the persistent anchor of catalog essays and conferences. Artists will continue to ask how far, until when, and wonder how long and since when, as a way of positioning themselves and the content of their works. Curators will continue to want to keep pace and extend the spatial coordinates of their reach and influence, even as they lose time. The galactic tern, like the Arctic tern, the bird, exhausted by its long seasonal migrations from one pole to another, will drop half dead on arrival.
It is now known that some objects floating in space, hitherto considered to be planets, are in fact not qualified to be defined as such. Pluto, an object at the outer edge of the solar system that contains the Earth, is now a demoted or retired planet. Its status as an explanet, or an object that pretended to be a planet until its cover was blown, hovers somewhere between that of an unanchored satellite, a giant adrift asteroid, and a very massive iceberg in outer space waiting for a passing spaceship to beat its Titanic. Exoplanets and planetary pretenders, like discursive frameworks who have seen better days, and candidates for theoretical attention hungry for the limelight, sulk at the peripheries of every solar system as angry clumps of dark matter, causing endless discord amongst art historians and the lay public alike about the inclusiveness or otherwise of a canon. The catalogue of a biennial in near space, an object likely to generate great interest in the art historians of tomorrow, is titled Dysnomia. Dysnomia is the satellite of Ceres, a recently discovered trans-Neptune object that has become a rival of Pluto in terms of consideration for a subplanetary status. While Pluto, as we have just seen, is an explanet, Ceres is a planet to be, waiting in the wings of astronomy. Dysnomia, the satellite of Ceres, also the daughter of Ceres, the goddess of discord in Greek mythology, is one of the most elusive and enigmatic objects in our solar system. In psychiatry and psychology, dysnomia is the name given to the clinical condition that involves the repeated forgetting of common words used to name familiar objects, phenomena, or concepts. We commonly experience it as the momentarily aphasic phenomenon of being unable to utter a word despite it being at the tip of our tongues. The inability to recall and use simple words to describe what we are thinking or doing is a general condition in contemporary art, as much as it is in art history. Hence, Dysnomia is an excellent title for the discursive flagship of our stellar canon.
Research in the history of intergalactic art is a formidable challenge. Many art historians have been burnt out by the experience. They're universally recognized as dead or dying stars that once held entire planetary systems in thrall through the sheer force of their gravitational power. Typically, if the discursive star gets too big, problems begin. Sheer size means that the star has to burn more energy than is produced at its core. This leads to a depletion of the inner resources of the star. Once a particular intellectual mandate gets spent and exhausted, it collapses in on itself, becoming extremely dense, even as it loses virtually all of its mass and energy. Sometimes this has been known to result in the unfortunately named conceptual black hole, a naked singularity whose event horizon is a threshold that no proximate object can resist falling into. The collapse of certain solar systems has been attributed to the overextended ambitions of their sons, intellectuals, and we might add curatorial maturity lies in growing at a moderate pace and in doing everything possible to avoid the fate of becoming a giant star on the verge of implosion. Despite the many differences in culture, planetary composition, and climate across the inner galaxy and between different art histories, there are certain persistent and common features. Even the history of art at the end of the universe is not as far out as its proponents have claimed. Each solar system invariably has only 42 works of art. And the short art historical monograph for the region invariably consists of precisely 42 pages. What's that called? The curve, the short Führer of the documenta, the little one, that one. The ubiquity of the number 42 across the guides and has been attributed to an obscure folkloric reference that continues to exercise a mysterious fascination over the minds of curators and artistic directors. People have sought answers to this question in vain. 42, it is commonly believed, is the key to some questions of universal significance, but no one is sure as to what the question is. Artists, of course, never tire of mining the number. At one not very distant solar system's biennale, an artist was able to create an installation that involved realigning a constellation of 42 icy asteroids in the Kuiper belt beyond the orbit of Neptune as a site-specific intervention in deep space. We're not calling this talk an ephemeris for nothing.
The role of 42 artworks per biennial does, however, come with a rider. Not every artwork is visible, and it is possible that there are many more that have not been counted even by their curators or by art historians simply because they have never been seen. When considering anything in deep space, it is essential to remember a fundamental maxim of interplanetary travel. What is essential is invisible to the eye. The practical application of this truth has led many artists to believe that there is something quite fundamentally not right with the universe. This conviction need not give rise to any crippling anxiety. The universe has its reasons for being what it is. There is no need for panic.
Thank you.